President Trump has been very clear on this point for many years and over 2 administrations. And for too long, NATO has been a paper tiger and a one-way street. No more.
Hegseth told NATO allies the free ride is over and then announced a review that could reshape America's military presence in Europe. This is the NATO Defense Ministers meeting, Brussels, June 18, 2026, 3 weeks before a NATO summit in Ankara. What you're about to hear is Hegseth's own words, largely unchallenged in the room. We'll tell you where independent reporting pushes back. Before Hegseth spoke, NATO's own Secretary General laid out the numbers allies were already hitting.
Good morning and welcome to this meeting of NATO Defense Ministers. This is the last milestone before our summit in Ankara in just 3 weeks. Today we will address how European allies and Canada are taking more responsibility for their conventional defense. To rebalance our security for the better, we are building a stronger Europe and a stronger NATO. That means allies demonstrating clear progress and a credible path towards investing 5% of GDP on defense. And turning that increased spending into combat-ready forces and capabilities now. We are already seeing truly impressive progress. In 2025, European allies and Canada invested over $90 billion, $90 billion more than the year before. That's an increase of nearly 20% in a single year. And we are already seeing further increases when it comes to the books for 2026.
Well, Mr. Secretary General, thank you for your leadership throughout and for this forum. And as I said at my first NATO Defense Ministerial last February, and as the Trump administration has said again and again in the last year and a half, our allies must step up. President Trump has been very clear on this point for many years and over 2 administrations. And for too long, NATO has been a paper tiger and a one-way street. No more. And that's what the Hague Summit is all about. That's what defense spending commitments are all about, transforming NATO back into a real military alliance that's focused on hard power and real deterrence, a NATO 3.0, modeled on the NATO 1.0 that won the Cold War, with our allies actually taking the lead in Europe's conventional defense. And that's what NATO was always supposed to be and what its framers like President Eisenhower always expected. Europe was not supposed to be a dependency of the United States. That's not what Winston Churchill or Charles de Gaulle or Konrad Adenauer wanted or expected. No, Europe was supposed to be a military power allied with a strong America. This is the essence of NATO 1.0. As Dwight Eisenhower himself said as early as 1951, if in 10 years all American troops stationed in Europe for national defense purposes have not been returned to the United States, then this whole process will have failed. Eisenhower was Supreme Allied Commander then, not yet our nation's 34th president. But he and his Allied counterparts, all of them still living in the shadow of World War II, understood that NATO's power did not come from committees or from meetings or from small flags on fancy tables. It came from warriors. And for Europe's defense, it had come from NATO allies. That was NATO 1.0, a hard-edged war-fighting organization focused on Europe's defense. But that spirit faded after the Cold War ended. No longer focused on defending Europe, NATO 2.0 drifted toward out-of-area operations and things that had nothing to do with warfighting at all. Instead of tanks and fighters and air defenses, the focus has been on gender equity and climate change and defense austerity. Europe's borders flew wide open. Welfare states expanded. Defense budgets cratered, along with Europe's belief in itself and its civilization. NATO lost its way. NATO 2.0 was an era of distraction, deindustrialization, and demilitarization. It was an era of free riding. And those were lost years that we're not going back to. And that's why
NPR's own reporting on this speech noted that Hegseth's characterization here largely mischaracterized European policy, pointing to the same $90 billion, 20% spending increase you just heard NATO's own Secretary General cite minutes earlier in the same room. Then Hegseth turned to something more specific: access for U.S. jets during the Iran war. This is the sharpest line in the entire speech. We break speeches and hearings like this down clip by clip. Subscribe if you want the next one.
for all of our clarity, too many allied capitals seem to still miss something in translation. Too many allies still don't recognize the historic need that President Trump has made clear to them and to NATO itself to reforge a relevant, powerful military alliance. As President Trump put it, and rightfully so, he gave our allies a test to support America when we asked for their help, and too many failed it. The United States has defended Europe for generations. And the president said, all he said was that our jets would need to take off from bases in Europe or our ships from ports to strike targets in the Middle East. Iranian targets that threaten European interests even more directly than they threaten us. But too many of our allies said no, or tried to drown us in arcane legal debates, or criticized us publicly for doing what they aren't prepared or able to do themselves. It was shameful. These allies, they put America's sons and daughters, our sons and daughters, at risk by denying them the predictable...
That accusation is where the consequences start.
This isn't what the president or America expects from this alliance. This is not what any reasonable person would expect. And it's not going to cut it anymore. And so we're doubling down on our effort to make NATO what it always was supposed to be, a balanced alliance with Europe in the lead for its own defense, NATO 3.0. And to make that a reality, I'm announcing today a 6-month Department of War review that will examine America's force posture and basing in Europe. Up to 6 months, could be less. Let's call it the NATO 3.0 review. This review will be conducted with the benefit of inputs from the United States military, from European Command. It will involve consultations with the U.S. Congress and with our allies. But make no mistake about it, this will be a real review. It will be designed to ensure that NATO is moving fast and irreversibly toward Europe leading, stepping up to take primary responsibility for the defense of Europe, stepping up to ensure our forces are postured for America's global needs, and stepping up to make sure that our access, basing, and overflight are clearly delineated and assured. Any other country would do the same. At the same time, going forward, our annual NATO dues will be contingent on other countries meeting their defense spending targets. Where other allies do not spend with urgency, our dues contributions will go down. NATO will be a two-way street. It's only common sense.
That
America
review doesn't
cannot
sit in a vacuum either. It follows a decision made a month earlier, the Pentagon withdrawing 5,000 troops from Germany. That withdrawal drew a public statement of concern not from Democrats, but from the Republican chairman of the Senate and House Armed Services Committees, Roger Wicker and Mike Rogers, who wrote that any significant change to U.S. force posture in Europe warrants a deliberate review process and close coordination with Congress and our allies. Line up what actually happened in that room. Hegseth said NATO had been a paper tiger, while NATO's own Secretary General had just cited a 20% jump in allied defense spending. He said allies failed a test over Iran access without naming which ones or detailing what legal objections they raised. And he announced a review of the American military footprint in Europe that even members of his own party have publicly called for more coordination on. None of this settles who's right. Hegseth's account of NATO's failures is his own, delivered largely without rebuttal in the room that day. The spending numbers, the bipartisan concern back home, and the question of exactly which allies said no, those are the parts still worth asking about. Subscribe for the next one, broken down clip by clip straight from the public record.